We always hear about countries, rising up the economic ladder
Yeah.
through like innovation or their manufacturing prowess, or, striking some savvy trade deals. But what if there's a story that's a little less conventional, a little more surprising?
Yeah.
One that kind of suggests that a country might be tapping into the Western economic engine in a way, well, let's just say, in a way we don't often talk
A
about.
surprising way, how? That's
Yeah.
definitely interesting.
Well, we've been digging into some analysis, and it presents a pretty, well, provocative argument, you could say. The idea is that India has kind of like developed this unique approach to, gaining economically in the West. And get this, it's not about the usual suspects, right? It's not about their exports or some big technological leap they've made. It's something else entirely. It claims that it's about getting their executives into high-paying leadership positions in Western companies, with the argument that the actual, results, the tangible outcomes from these positions are often, well, minimal, to put it mildly. The idea at its core is that India profits a lot significantly through the huge flow of remittances back home.
So instead of looking at the usual signs of economic power, this perspective is saying it's more about how they're working within the structure of Western labor markets.
Interesting. Exactly. And that's why we're doing this deep dive, right? To really get into this whole viewpoint, see what makes it tick. We want to understand, like, what are the main points of this argument? How does it say this thing is actually working? And how does it compare to how other major players on the global stage are doing things? Especially compared to, like, the more established economic models that, countries like China are using. So, okay, let's break it down, starting with the main claim. What exactly is this analysis proposing?
Well, the core claim, at least how it's presented in this material, it's pretty straightforward. It argues that India's economic strategy is all about strategically placing, its people, its nationals, in leadership positions within Western corporations. The key point here, the real kicker, is that while these individuals, these executives, are often making serious bank, raking in big salaries, their actual tangible contributions, whether it's innovation, productivity, actual growth for the company, are often, well, how do I put this? Disproportionately low, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I get it. So the emphasis isn't on creating like groundbreaking products or building these massive production capabilities. It's not about that. Instead, if you buy into this viewpoint, the focus is all about securing those high-level positions, getting those corner offices, and snagging the fat paychecks that come with them. It's like the leadership positions themselves are the main export, not a specific product or service that's actually adding value for these Western firms.
You got it. That's a key difference that the source really hammers home. It uses some strong words like corporate deception, almost suggesting that this isn't just some natural outcome of how global talent moves around, The argument here is that there's intention behind it, a deliberate focus on essentially extracting wealth from the West through these inflated salaries instead of, contributing economically in a way that directly benefits the Western companies.
And that takes us to this, well, kind of pointed idea that these executives, they often come in making these big splashy promises, right? Like they're going to revolutionize industries or take businesses to a whole new level. But then in the end, the actual outcomes, the stuff they actually deliver, it falls way short of those expectations. The picture it paints is a lot of talk, a lot of fancy presentations, but not a lot of substance to back it up.
That's the gist of it. The source material really emphasizes this disconnect, this gap between what you'd expect from high-level leadership and the alleged reality, which is, well, stagnation or just a lack of any meaningful progress within the companies that these executives are supposed to be running. It's like they're creating an illusion of progress, but without the substance. There's this outward appearance of strong leadership, but it doesn't translate into actual achievements or concrete results.
So if the real work, the heavy lifting, isn't actually happening in these roles, then how is India profiting, according to this analysis? I mean, that's where this whole remittances thing comes in, right?
Yeah, you're right. According to this analysis, the way they profit is all about bringing those big salaries back home. The idea is, even if these executives aren't really contributing much to the Western companies, they're still getting paid a ton, and that allows them to send a lot of money back to India. The source material's pretty blunt about it. It straight up calls it robbing the West through the labor market. The basic idea is that value is being sucked out of Western companies in the form of these huge salary payments, but there's no real return on that investment, no corresponding increase in productivity or innovation. And then all that money, it just flows right back to India as remittances.
It's definitely a different way of thinking about how countries benefit economically on the global stage. It's not like physical goods being shipped across borders or intellectual property changing hands. It's capital money flowing back based on these, well, salary differences, you could say. Now, the source material draws a pretty sharp contrast between this, let's call it India's alleged strategy, and the economic model that's fueled China's rise. Can you unpack that comparison for us, as it's laid out in this analysis?
What's really interesting in the material is how it directly compares the two. It presents China's economic success as being built on tangible things, real achievements. It's about large-scale manufacturing, producing a huge range of goods, developing and exporting technology, and building the physical infrastructure that makes global trade possible. The source argues that this model creates real value, tangible value. There are actual products and services being traded on the international market.
And the argument is that India's approach, at least according to this analysis, is fundamentally different. It's not about making things or building things. It's much more focused on getting those high-level leadership positions, getting a seat at the table, and then reaping the financial rewards. But without, making the same kind of tangible contribution or creating the same real-world value for Western economies. The language used in the source is pretty harsh. It even says that India focuses on fake work and empty promises, which it directly contrasts with China's approach of producing real goods and services.
You got it. The source paints this picture of two very distinct global economic strategies. One is all about making things, producing things, and engaging in international trade. The other, it claims, is about strategically taking advantage of the way Western corporations are structured, getting into those leadership roles and extracting financial gain through salaries, regardless of whether they're actually producing anything or innovating.
So that brings up a really important question. Why would Western companies, according to this source material, be vulnerable to this alleged strategy in the first place? I mean, what could explain why they would keep offering these high-paying positions if they're not getting as much back as they expected?
Well, the analysis points to a couple of key factors. One is this genuine desire, and it's a good thing in many ways, for more diversity and global representation in their leadership teams. Western companies, they really value this, and they might see Indian executives as, checking those boxes. Another factor is that companies can be swayed by what the source calls the appearance of success. Impressive job titles, polished presentations, and these grand sweeping strategic visions. Those can be mistaken for actual progress, at least in the short term. There's also this idea that sometimes companies get so caught up in immediate optics, how things look right now, that they don't really scrutinize the long-term tangible results as much as they should.
So it's almost like they're paying a premium for the image, the look of having a globally diverse and forward-thinking leadership team, even if what's happening underneath the actual achievements don't really match that image. At least that's how this perspective sees it. The source even goes so far as to talk about this alleged culture of empty promises that it claims exists within these Indian leadership roles. What exactly does that mean, according to the material?
The source material suggests that there might be a particular corporate culture that's taken root in some Indian leadership circles, a culture that puts more emphasis on outward appearances, networking, and maybe being really good at talking about ambitious plans, but without the same focus on actually executing those plans and delivering measurable results. It's presented as a culture where the priority is on projecting this image of competence and progress, even if the actual achievements don't back it up. It's all about the presentation, the promise, rather than the actual production, the tangible outcomes.
And who ends up footing the bill for all of this, according to the source material? Well, it says that it's the Western companies themselves. They're the ones shelling out big bucks for these high salary packages, investing in initiatives that are led by these executives. And ultimately, they might be missing out on the innovation and progress they were hoping for when they made these appointments.
That's the heart of the cost to the West argument in this analysis. The source is suggesting that these companies are basically funding underperformance, and they're doing it on a pretty big scale. They're pouring a significant chunk of their budgets into executive salaries that aren't translating into the levels of return, innovation, or growth that they expected. It's not just a direct financial drain, it's also a missed opportunity. Think about the progress they could have made with more productive leadership, the resources they could have invested strategically in other areas.
So let's recap this alleged cycle as it's described in the source. India strategically places its people in these high-paying roles. Promises are made about significant advancements and big changes, but the actual tangible results often fall short. And this dynamic, according to the analysis, creates this pathway for a large transfer of wealth back to India through remittances, while Western companies are left holding the bag, stuck paying for what the source calls the illusion of progress.
Yeah, that's a good summary of the cycle as it's presented in the material we've been looking at. It highlights this perceived imbalance in the exchange of resources, where a lot of financial capital flows from west to east in the form of salaries, but the argument is that there's a lack of value creation within the Western companies to justify it.
So we've done a deep dive into this pretty critical perspective on India's economic activity in Western economies. The central claim, as we've explored, is this idea that they're strategically putting executives in these high-paying roles, but there's not a lot of return on investment for the Western companies. And the main beneficiary, according to this analysis, is India because of the huge amount of money being sent back as remittances. We've also looked at how this alleged strategy is contrasted with China's economic model, which is built on manufacturing, and we've considered the potential costs to Western companies.
It's definitely a perspective that challenges how we usually think about global economic interactions. It makes us rethink what it really means to contribute economically and how the international labor market works in our interconnected world.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a thought-provoking question for you, our listener. If you take this perspective seriously, this idea that a nation might be benefiting from the West, not through traditional trade or technological innovation, but by placing its people in influential, highly paid positions where they might not be producing much, what does that mean in the long run? What are the potential consequences for both Western economies and India's global economic role if this dynamic, as it's described in the source material, continues? It really forces us to consider the different models of economic contribution that are out there and whether each one is sustainable in the long run, especially as our world becomes more and more interconnected.